The iron gates of Thornhill Manor closed behind Lady Catherine Ashford with a finality that echoed through her chest. 23 years of silk gowns and afternoon tea, erased in a single afternoon when her uncle's lawyers declared her father's debts too substantial to honor his title. The creditors took everything: the manor, the lands, even her mother's pearl necklace. All that remained was a one-way ticket to the Montana Territory and a marriage contract to a man she'd never met, arranged by distant cousins eager to be rid of her burden. The stagecoach had deposited her at the edge of a sprawling ranch 3 hours past dawn. Her trunks already disappeared into the dust. A foreman with tobacco-stained teeth had smirked as he read the letter aloud. Miss Ashford is to wed Thomas Garrett, ranch hand, in settlement of family obligation. Not even her title remained. Catherine Ashford, former Lady of Hampshire, reduced to payment for debts she never incurred. Before we continue with Catherine's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? At home? During your commute? Let us know in the comments. Now, the September sun beat down on the ranch yard where Catherine stood, her traveling dress already covered in trail dust. Through the open door of the bunkhouse, she could see men playing cards, their laughter rough and careless. One of them would be her husband by nightfall, according to the arrangement. The thought made her stomach turn. You the Ashford girl? A man emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. He was shorter than Catherine, with a weak chin and eyes that traveled her body with undisguised assessment. I'm Garrett. Guess you're mine now. Catherine's fingers found the small sapphire ring on her right hand, the only piece of jewelry the creditors had missed, hidden in her boot during the seizure. It had been her grandmother's, worth perhaps $50. Enough for a stagecoach ticket to San Francisco, maybe. Enough to escape this humiliation. I have something of value, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I can pay you to tear up that contract. Please. Garrett's laugh was sharp and ugly. Pay me? Lady, you are the payment. Now get inside and... She's not going anywhere with you. The voice came from behind her, deep and quiet as distant thunder. Catherine turned to see a man leading a massive gray stallion toward the water trough. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained against a simple work shirt, the sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded with muscle and decorated with scars. His hair was dark, nearly black, falling past his collar, and his eyes were the color of creek stones, currently fixed on Garrett with an intensity that made the smaller man step back. Stay out of this, Hawthorne, Garrett snapped. Mr. Richardson gave her to me fair and square. Payment for her family's debt on that fancy horse order they never paid for. Richardson doesn't own people. The tall man, Hawthorne, tied off his horse with practiced efficiency. And you're not fit to own a dog, let alone a wife. He turned those storm-gray eyes to Catherine, and she felt something shift in her chest. There was no pity in his gaze, only a quiet assessment that somehow made her feel less like property and more like a person for the first time since the lawyers had arrived. What's your name? He asked. Catherine. Catherine Ashford. She lifted her chin, reclaiming what she could. Lady Catherine Ashford, though I suppose that means nothing here. Means you survived something that would have broken most people. He stepped closer, and Catherine caught the scent of leather and sage, saw the way he moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime in his body. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. A healed knife wound, she guessed. You can keep your ring, but I'm guessing what you really need is a place where nobody owns you. Am I right? Catherine felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. I need to not be property. I need to be seen as a person. Yeah. Hawthorne turned back to Garrett. Go tell Richardson the arrangement's off. Tell him James Hawthorne paid the debt in full. And Miss Ashford is under my protection now. Your protection? Garrett's face flushed red. You're just the horse trainer, Hawthorne. You don't even own land. I own the north section free and clear. 300 acres Richardson sold me last spring. Check the county records. Hawthorne's voice remained level, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. And I've got enough put away to cover whatever the Ashfords owed. Now move along, before I forget you're not worth the effort of hitting. Garrett opened his mouth, looked at Hawthorne's scarred hands, and apparently thought better of it. He spat in the dirt and stalked toward the main house, muttering curses. Catherine stood frozen, her ring still clutched in her palm. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Because I know what it's like to be traded like livestock. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. I was born to a Lakota mother and an Irish father. Neither side fully claimed me. Spent years being passed around until I made my own way. Nobody should go through that. He gestured toward a modest cabin visible beyond the barn. I've got a spare room. You can stay there. Work if you want. I need help with the horses and the books, but there's no obligation and no marriage contract unless you choose it freely. I don't understand, Catherine's voice cracked. Men don't just help. There's always a price. Then I guess I'm not like most men. Hawthorne picked up his horse's reins. Come on, I'll show you where you can rest. Tomorrow, if you stay, I'll teach you to ride properly. Woman should know how to get herself out of trouble without depending on anyone. As Catherine followed him across the dusty ranch yard, the sapphire ring heavy in her pocket, she realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since the creditors had arrived at Thornhill Manor, she wasn't running from something. She was walking toward a possibility she couldn't yet name. The cabin Hawthorne led her to was simple, but meticulously kept. 2 rooms, divided by a curtain of what looked like deer hide, decorated with beadwork in geometric patterns. The main room held a stone fireplace, a scarred wooden table, and shelves lined with books. Far more books than Catherine expected from a horse trainer. I built this 5 years ago, Hawthorne said, setting her small bag on the table. The back room's yours. I'll sleep out here. There's a lock on your door. Use it if it makes you feel safer. Catherine stared at the door, then at this strange man who spoke of her safety as though it mattered. What do you want from me? Really? Hawthorne met her eyes, and she saw something raw there. Old pain, carefully controlled. I want you to have a choice. That's all. Stay, go, decide tomorrow or next month. But while you're here, you're not property. You're not payment. You're a person with worth that has nothing to do with family name or debts. He paused at the door. There's a pump out back for washing up. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. After he left, Catherine sat on the simple bed and let herself shake. She pulled out the sapphire ring, held it to the light streaming through the window. For weeks, she'd thought this small jewel was her only value, her only escape. But Hawthorne had looked at her and seen something else entirely. She didn't know yet if she could trust it. But for the first time since losing everything, she felt the smallest spark of something that might become hope. That evening, Catherine ventured out to find Hawthorne in the barn, working on a saddle by lamplight. The gray stallion from earlier stood in the nearest stall, watching with intelligent dark eyes. "That's Smoke," Hawthorne said without looking up. "Got him from a crow trader 3 years back. Best horse I've ever worked with." Catherine ran her fingers along the stall door. "I used to ride every morning at Thornhill. Side saddle, of course, on perfectly groomed paths." She smiled bitterly. "I suppose that's useless here." "Not useless, just different." Hawthorne set down the saddle soap. "Tomorrow morning, if you're willing, I'll teach you to ride like you mean it. Western saddle, full control. It's harder than what you're used to, but it's also freeing." "Why do you care whether I can ride?" Catherine asked. "If I'm just staying temporarily." Hawthorne stood, and in the lamplight, his features seemed carved from stone, all hard angles and quiet strength. "Because knowing you can take care of yourself matters more than anything else. My mother taught me that before the fever took her. Said the difference between surviving and living was knowing you had the power to choose your own path." He paused. "You had that choice taken from you. I'm just trying to help you get it back." Something in Catherine's chest loosened. "Will you tell me about her? Your mother?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Come on, I'll make coffee, and we can talk where it's warmer." Back in the cabin, Hawthorne built up the fire while Catherine settled at the table. He moved with the efficiency of someone long accustomed to solitude, measuring coffee grounds into a battered pot. "Her name was Winona," he said finally. "She was Lakota, from a band that traded regularly with the fort where my father worked as a blacksmith. He was a good man, treated her with respect, married her properly despite what people said. But when I was 8, there was a raid. My father was killed defending the settlement." Hawthorne's voice remained steady, but his hands tightened around the coffee pot. "My mother's people wouldn't take me back because of my father's blood. The settlers wouldn't keep me because of hers. So I learned early, the only person you can truly depend on is yourself." "That's terribly lonely," Catherine whispered. "It was, until I stopped trying to fit into spaces that weren't made for me and started building my own." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, slid one across to her. "I worked ranches, saved money, learned everything I could about horses and land. 5 years ago, I bought my section from Richardson. It's mine. Clear title. Nobody can take it." Catherine wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I thought having a title meant I was safe. Turns out paper protections don't mean much when the right people decide to take them away." "No," Hawthorne agreed. "Real protection comes from knowing your own strength, from having skills nobody can strip away." He studied her across the table. "You're stronger than you think, Catherine. I saw it in the way you stood up to Garrett, offering that ring. You were terrified, but you didn't back down. I was desperate. Same thing sometimes." He smiled, just a slight curve of his mouth, but it transformed his severe features into something almost gentle. "The point is, you survived losing everything and traveled 2,000 miles into unknown territory. That takes courage." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the coffee. When was the last time anyone had called her courageous? At Thornhill, she'd been decorative, accomplished, marriageable. Here, in this rough cabin, with this scarred, quiet man, she was being seen as something more. "What happened to your face?" she asked, then immediately regretted the boldness. "I'm sorry, that was honest?" Hawthorne touched the scar absently. "It's all right. I got that in a knife fight 7 years ago. A man tried to steal from my camp. Didn't like being caught. I won, but I learned to be more careful about who I trust." He paused. "For what it's worth, I trust my instincts about people. And my instincts say you're worth the risk." Catherine's throat tightened. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Hawthorne stood, gathering the cups. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day if you're serious about learning to ride properly." Catherine retreated to her room, but sleep was elusive. Through the deer-hide curtain, she could hear Hawthorne moving around the main room, the creak of wood as he settled onto what must be a very uncomfortable sleeping arrangement. He'd given up his own bed for her privacy, asked nothing in return, and offered her something she'd thought lost forever: the freedom to choose. She touched the sapphire ring still on her finger. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start learning to be the person Hawthorne seemed to see when he looked at her. Someone strong enough to build a new life from ruins. The next morning dawned, clear and cold. Catherine dressed in the simplest clothes she had, a cotton dress that had been for traveling, already stained from the journey. When she emerged from her room, she found Hawthorne outside, leading a smaller chestnut mare toward the cabin. "This is Willow," he said. "She's steady and forgiving, good for learning. I already saddled her." He gestured to the western saddle, so different from the side saddles Catherine was used to. "You'll ride astride, more control, better balance." Catherine approached the mare cautiously. Willow nickered softly, her dark eyes kind. "Hello, girl," Catherine murmured, stroking the velvety nose. "Good," Hawthorne said. "She likes you. Now let me show you how to mount." The next hour was awkward and occasionally humiliating. Catherine's skirts tangled in the stirrups. Her balance felt all wrong. Twice she nearly slid off, and both times Hawthorne caught her with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size and strength. "Easy," he said the second time, his hands steadying her waist. "You're trying too hard. Let your body find the rhythm." Catherine was intensely aware of his proximity, the heat of his palms through the fabric of her dress, the way his gray eyes watched her with patience rather than judgment. "In England, ladies don't sit astride," she said breathlessly. "It's considered improper. Good thing we're not in England." Hawthorne's mouth quirked. "Out here, proper gets you killed. Useful keeps you alive." By noon, Catherine was exhausted, but exhilarated. She'd managed a full circuit of the fenced pasture without losing her seat, and the triumph of it sang through her veins. "You're a natural," Hawthorne said, helping her dismount. His hands lingered a moment on her waist before he stepped back. "Tomorrow we'll work on steering. By next week, you'll be able to handle her on your own." "Thank you." Catherine looked up at him, this man who'd become her unlikely teacher. "For all of this, I know I haven't said it properly, but you don't need to thank me for treating you like a person." Hawthorne's voice was gruff. That should be the baseline, not something special. But it was special, Catherine thought. In her world of titles and arrangements, basic decency had been rare currency. Over the following weeks, a rhythm developed. Catherine rose with the sun to help Hawthorne with the horses, feeding, grooming, mucking stalls. The work was hard, and her hands blistered, but she found satisfaction in the simple physicality of it. Hawthorne taught her to read horses' moods, to spot lameness, to mix proper feed ratios. He was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain. In the afternoons, she worked on his books. Years of managing Thornhill's household accounts made her quick with figures, and Hawthorne's records were a disaster of half-completed ledgers and lost receipts. "You're not charging nearly enough for training services," Catherine said one evening, frowning at the numbers. Mr. Richardson pays you $20 a month to break his horses, but you're spending 40 hours on each animal. Hawthorne shrugged. Richardson gave me a fair price on the land, which you paid for, Catherine countered. This is business, not charity. You should charge at least $35 per horse, and more for problem animals. That seems fair. It's fair. Catherine tapped the ledger. You're skilled labor, James. You should be compensated appropriately. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and she saw something flicker in his expression. All right, he said quietly. I'll renegotiate the contract. They fell into other patterns too. Evening conversations over coffee, where Hawthorne would tell stories of his travels, years spent wandering from ranch to ranch, learning his craft, searching for a place that felt like home. Catherine found herself sharing memories of Thornhill, not with bitterness now, but with gentle nostalgia for the good parts. Her father reading to her in his study, riding through morning mist, the library where she devoured every book she could find. You miss it, Hawthorne observed one night. I miss what it represented, Catherine corrected. Security, belonging somewhere. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. But I'm learning that belonging isn't about a place or a title. It's about feeling valued for who you are, not what you represent. Hawthorne's eyes met hers across the table, and Catherine felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Over weeks of working together, she'd come to appreciate more than just his kindness. She noticed the way lamplight caught in his dark hair, the strength in his scarred hands, the rare smiles that made her pulse quicken. She was falling for him. Had been falling since that first day when he'd looked at her and seen worth instead of debt. But Hawthorne maintained careful distance, never crossing the invisible line between employer and employee, protector and protected. Until the night, everything changed. It was mid-October when the storm hit. One of those early winter tempests that swept down from the mountains with terrifying speed. Catherine had been returning from the well when the first drops fell, cold and hard as pebbles. By the time she reached the cabin, the rain was a solid wall of water. Hawthorne burst through the door minutes later, soaked to the skin. Smoke's loose, he said, water streaming from his hair. Fence came down in the west pasture. I have to. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that Catherine felt the hair on her arms rise. Thunder followed immediately, a boom that shook the cabin's walls. You can't go out in this, Catherine said. James, you'll be killed. If smoke, Hawthorne grabbed a coil of rope from the peg by the door. Then I'm coming with you. Catherine was already pulling on the oilskin coat he'd given her weeks ago. You'll need help searching, and I know how to handle Willow in bad weather now. Catherine, no. You said I was a person with worth, remember? That means I get to make my own choices. She met his eyes steadily. And I choose to help you. For a long moment, they stood there, rain hammering the roof. They rode out into the storm together, the wind trying to tear them from their saddles. Catherine clung to Willow's mane, following Hawthorne's broad back through the driving rain. The western pasture was a sea of mud, the fence indeed torn down, posts snapped like kindling. Hawthorne cupped his hands around his mouth. Smoke! Here, boy! No answer but the howling wind. They searched for what felt like hours, pushing deeper into the rangeland beyond the pasture. Catherine's hand. The stallion tossed his head but didn't bolt. Catherine watched Hawthorne work, marveling at his patience, even in the midst of the storm. He ran his hands down Smoke's leg, checking for breaks, then carefully looped the rope around the stallion's neck. "He's all right," Hawthorne called over the wind. "Just bruised. We need to—" The crack of breaking wood cut him off. Catherine looked up to see a massive cottonwood limb, weakened by lightning, tearing free from the trunk directly above Hawthorne. There was no time to shout, no time to think. She spurred Willow forward, leaning dangerously from the saddle to grab Hawthorne's arm and yank him backward. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and mud, the tree branch crashing down inches from where Hawthorne had stood. Catherine landed hard on her side, pain shooting through her ribs, Hawthorne's weight half on top of her. For a moment, neither moved. Then Hawthorne rolled off her, his hands immediately going to her face, her shoulders, checking for injuries with frantic efficiency. "Catherine, are you hurt? Talk to me." "I'm fine." She wasn't really. Her ribs ached and she'd lost her breath. But seeing the raw fear in his eyes made her own pain secondary. "Are you? You could have been killed." Hawthorne's voice shook. All his careful control shattered. "That branch, if your timing had been off by a second." But it wasn't. Catherine reached up to touch his face, rainwater streaming between her fingers. "James, I'm all right." His forehead dropped to hers, his breath coming hard and fast. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "I thought I could keep distance, keep this professional, keep you safe. But Catherine—" His hand came up to cup the back of her head, impossibly gentle. "You saved my life. You could have stayed safe, and you risked yourself for me. Nobody's ever—" "You saved me first," Catherine interrupted. "When you told Garrett no, when you gave me a choice, you saved me." She closed the last inch of distance, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was cold and wet and tasted of rain and mud, and it was perfect. Hawthorne made a low sound in his chest, his arms coming around her to lift her against him. For a long moment, they knelt there in the mud, the storm raging around them, holding each other like the world might tear them apart if they let go. When they finally broke apart, Hawthorne's gray eyes were fierce. "We need to get you back to the cabin. You're shaking. So are you." "Yeah." He smiled, that rare, transforming smile, and kissed her again, quick and hard. "So I am." They made it back to the cabin, with Smoke and Willow both in tow, soaked and exhausted, but alive. Inside, Hawthorne built up the fire, while Catherine changed into dry clothes in her room, wincing at the deep bruises already forming along her left side. When she emerged, Hawthorne had stripped off his soaked shirt, revealing a torso marked with old scars and corded with muscle earned through years of hard labor. He looked up as she entered, concern immediate on his face. "You're hurt. Let me—" "It's just bruising." But she let him lead her to the chair by the fire, let him kneel before her with gentle hands that probed her ribs with practiced care. "Nothing broken," he said finally, "but you're going to be sore for weeks." His jaw tightened. "I should never have let you come with me." "You didn't let me do anything. I chose." Catherine caught his hands, held them in hers. "James, stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. What happened tonight? I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because you matter to me. Because," she took a shaky breath, "because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, stark and honest. Hawthorne's expression went very still. "You don't have to say anything," Catherine continued quickly. "I know this wasn't what you signed up for. I know you were just trying to help me find my feet again, but I needed you to know. I loved you from the moment you offered to pay Garrett with that ring." Hawthorne's voice was rough with emotion, saw this scared, exhausted woman who'd lost everything. And instead of begging or crying, you stood straight and negotiated. You were magnificent. His hands tightened on hers. I told myself I'd keep distance, let you heal, give you time to figure out what you wanted without pressure. But Catherine, I've been lying to myself. I want you to stay. Not as an employee or a guest. I want you to stay because this is your home too. Because I love you, and I want to build a life with you. Catherine's vision blurred with tears. Even though I come with nothing, no dowry, no title, no, you come with everything that matters. Hawthorne cupped her face in his scarred hands. Courage and intelligence and a heart brave enough to save the life of a broken-down horse trainer in the middle of a storm. You're worth more than all the titles in England. He paused, vulnerability naked in his eyes. Will you marry me? Not because of some debt or arrangement, but because you choose to. Yes. Catherine laughed through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. I choose you, James Hawthorne. I choose this life we're building together. He kissed her then, slow and deep, the fire warming their backs as the storm continued to rage outside. Catherine felt something fundamental settle in her chest. Not the false security of titles and estates, but the real safety of being loved for exactly who she was. I should warn you, Hawthorne murmured against her lips. I'm not always easy to live with. I get absorbed in training horses. I forget to eat. And I have nightmares sometimes about the past. And I'm stubborn. I correct your bookkeeping constantly. And I still can't cook properly over an open fire. Catherine smiled. I suppose we'll have to muddle through together. Together, Hawthorne echoed, and kissed her again. They were married 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Catherine wore a dress made from blue calico, practical and beautiful, sewn by her own hands with tips from the rancher's wife, Mrs. Richardson. Hawthorne wore his best shirt and vest, his hair tied back, looking nervous and proud in equal measure. Richardson himself stood as witness, along with his wife. The old rancher had been skeptical when Hawthorne first told him about buying out Garrett's contract, but seeing them together had apparently satisfied him. You're a lucky man, Hawthorne, Richardson said after the ceremony, shaking his hand. And you, Mrs. Hawthorne, you ever get tired of horses? I could use someone with your head for numbers at the main house. Catherine smiled, her hand safe in James's. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Richardson, but I'm rather occupied with our own operation. James is going to teach me to break horses properly, and I'm going to make sure he actually charges what he's worth. Richardson laughed. I don't doubt it. You two are going to do well together. That night, in the cabin that was now truly their home, Hawthorne carried Catherine over the threshold with exaggerated ceremony that made her laugh. He set her down gently, mindful of her still healing ribs, and pulled her close. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For choosing me, for seeing past the scars to whatever's worth loving underneath. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, for being brave enough to start over in a place that must have seemed terrifying at first. Catherine reached up to trace the scar on his face, that mark of survival she'd come to love. You gave me back my worth, she said. When everyone else saw me as debt or property or burden, you saw a person deserving of respect and choice. That's not something I'll ever take for granted. You always had that worth, Catherine. I just had the sense to recognize it. James kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it again. They made love slowly in the firelight, learning the map of each other's bodies with careful hands and whispered promises. Afterward, Catherine lay with her head on James's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and marveled at how far she'd come from that terrified woman standing in the ranch yard with a ring in her palm. She'd lost everything she thought defined her: the title, the estate, the life of careful propriety. But in losing it, she'd found something more valuable: a partner who saw her strength, a home she'd helped build, and the freedom to choose her own path. Outside, the Montana night was cold and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast sky. Inside, wrapped in her husband's arms, Catherine felt something she'd never experienced in all her years at Thornhill Manor: complete and utter belonging. The first winter of their marriage tested them in ways Catherine hadn't anticipated. Wasn't the cold, though the Montana winter bit, fierce and deep, but rather the intimacy of sharing space with another person after years of careful solitude for them both. James had warned her about his nightmares, but nothing prepared Catherine for the reality of waking to find him thrashing in the darkness, his voice breaking on words in Lakota she couldn't understand. The first time it happened, she'd frozen, uncertain whether to wake him or let him fight through it alone. She chose to wake him, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "James, you're safe. You're home." He jerked awake, disoriented and breathing hard, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he kept beneath the pillow. When his eyes focused on her face in the moonlight streaming through the window, she saw the exact moment awareness returned, followed immediately by shame. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I didn't mean to—" "Stop." Catherine caught his face in her hands. "You have nothing to apologize for. Tell me what you need." For a long moment he just stared at her, as though unable to believe she wasn't angry or frightened. Then something in him broke open. "Can you just hold me? Just for a minute?" Catherine pulled him down to rest his head against her chest, her fingers threading through his hair. She felt the tension in his shoulders gradually ease, his breathing slow. Outside, wind howled across the frozen rangeland, but inside their small cabin, they created their own warmth. "It was the raid," James said finally, his voice muffled against her nightgown. "The one that killed my father. I dream about it sometimes, hearing my mother scream, being too small to help, watching the cabin burn. And then it shifts, and it's this cabin burning, and you're inside, and I can't reach you." Catherine's throat tightened. "I'm right here. I'm safe." I know that when I'm awake, but in the dreams," he pulled back to look at her, vulnerability naked in his eyes. "I've lost everyone I've ever loved, Catherine. My mother, my father, even the few friends I've made over the years. They all moved on eventually. You're the first person who's chosen to stay, and the thought of losing you terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced." "Then let me tell you something." Catherine took his scarred hands in hers. "I chose you, James Hawthorne. Not just on our wedding day, but every single day since. When I wake up next to you, when I work beside you, when I fall asleep in your arms, those are all choices I make because I love you. And no nightmare can change that." He kissed her then, desperate and grateful, and Catherine held him through it, this strong man who'd carried so much alone for so long. They made love slowly afterward, a different kind of intimacy than before. Not just physical, but emotional. Two people letting down their final defenses and trusting each other with their deepest fears. In the morning, as dawn light painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Catherine woke to find James already up, stoking the fire with quiet efficiency. He looked over as she stirred, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. "Thank you," he said simply, "for last night, for not running." "Where would I run to?" Catherine smiled. "This is my home. You're my home." The winter continued to test them in other ways. The cold was brutal, and more than once, Catherine found herself questioning why anyone would choose to live in such an unforgiving place. The work was endless, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling hay to the horses, maintaining the cabin against the bitter wind that seemed determined to find every crack and gap. But there were moments of beauty, too. James teaching her the ice skate on the frozen creek. Both of them laughing like children as they fell and helped each other up. Evenings spent by the fire, Catherine reading aloud from the books on James's shelves while he worked on repairing tack. The quiet satisfaction of sitting together in comfortable silence, knowing they didn't need constant conversation to feel connected. One particularly harsh evening in January, with a blizzard howling outside that made venturing to the barn dangerous, they sat close to the fire wrapped in blankets. "Tell me about England," James said suddenly. "Not Thornhill Manor or your father's debts. Tell me about you, what you loved, what you dreamed about before everything fell apart." Catherine considered the question, surprised to realize how rarely she let herself think about those early days. "I loved books," she said finally. "My father had an extensive library, and I read everything I could find. Travel narratives, natural philosophy, poetry, novels that were considered inappropriate for young ladies." She smiled at the memory. "I used to imagine I'd marry someone who loved books as much as I did, and we'd spend our evenings discussing philosophy and literature. And instead you got a half-breed horse trainer who can barely read Shakespeare without falling asleep," James said dryly. "No." Catherine turned to face him. "I got a man who notices when I'm tired and takes over the evening chores without being asked, who teaches me skills that make me stronger and more capable, who looks at me and sees a partner, not an ornament." She touched his face. "I got something better than my childhood dreams, James. I got reality, messy and difficult and absolutely perfect." He kissed her softly. "You always know the right thing to say." "That's because I mean it." Catherine settled back against his chest. "Besides, you read better than you think. You just prefer books about horse training and land management to poetry." Guilty, his arms tightened around her. "Though I wouldn't mind if you read me some of that inappropriate poetry sometime." Catherine laughed, the sound bright in the small cabin. "Scandalous, Mr. Hawthorne." "I try, Mrs. Hawthorne." They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, the blizzard eventually exhausting itself against the sturdy walls of the home they'd built together. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Richardson approached them in early April with a proposition that would change everything. "I'm getting old," the rancher said bluntly, sitting at their table with a cup of Catherine's improving coffee. "My sons have no interest in running the ranch. They've both gone east, chasing opportunities in railroad management. I need someone I can trust to take over the horse training operation for the entire spread." James and Catherine exchanged glances. "What exactly are you proposing?" James asked carefully. "I want to make you my head horse trainer, full-time, exclusive contract, 20 horses minimum per year, plus any problem animals that need special handling. I'll pay you $50 per horse, plus a percentage of sale prices for any animals you train that we sell for profit. Richardson leaned back. That's at least $1,000 a year, Hawthorne. Probably more. But it means you'd be working for me full-time. No outside contracts, no other ranches. The sum was staggering. Catherine did the math quickly in her head. It was more than double what they'd made the previous year, and it would give them stability they'd never had before. But she could see the conflict in James's face. "Can we have some time to discuss it?" Catherine asked. "Of course. Take a week." Richardson stood, nodding to them both. "I know it's a big decision, but I trust you two, and I want to see you succeed. Think it over." After he left, James paced the small cabin like a caged animal. $1,000 a year, he muttered. We could build that new barn, expand the house, maybe even buy more land adjacent to our property. "But," Catherine prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, "but it means giving up independence. No more choosing my own clients. No more setting my own schedule. I'd be working for Richardson exclusively." He stopped pacing, running his hands through his hair. "I spent so many years being dependent on others' goodwill, Catherine. The thought of putting myself back in that position—" "It's not the same thing," Catherine interrupted gently. "You wouldn't be dependent. You'd be entering a business partnership with clear terms and fair compensation. Richardson respects you, James. He's not trying to control you. He's trying to secure the best trainer in the territory. You think I should take it? I think we should decide together." Catherine stood, moving to take his hands. "What does your instinct say?" James was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant. "My instinct says this is the opportunity I've been working toward my whole life. Recognition, respect, financial security. Everything I dreamed about when I was a kid being passed around like an unwanted burden." He focused on her face. "But I need to know you're truly on board. This affects you too." "Then let me be clear," Catherine said firmly. "I think you should accept. Not just because of the money, though that certainly helps, but because Richardson is offering you validation. He's saying you're the best at what you do, and he wants to build his business around your skills. That's not dependence, James. That's power." A slow smile spread across James's face. "When did you get so wise?" "I married well," Catherine teased. "He teaches me new things every day." They accepted Richardson's offer the following week. The contract was drawn up properly, with Catherine insisting on several provisions that protected their interests, including the right to renegotiate terms annually and a clause ensuring they could still train horses on their own property for personal use. "Your wife drives a hard bargain, Hawthorne," Richardson said with grudging admiration as they signed the papers. "Remind me to never play cards with her." The work was demanding but rewarding. James trained 2 to 3 horses at a time, each one requiring weeks of patient, skilled handling. Catherine helped where she could and found herself becoming a competent trainer in her own right. The horses responded to her quiet confidence, and more than once, James remarked that she had a natural gift for reading animal behavior. But success brought attention, and not all of it welcome. It was late May when the trouble started. Catherine had ridden into town alone to pick up supplies, something she did regularly now, with complete confidence on Willow. She'd just finished loading her purchases when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Well, if it isn't the former Lady Ashford. She turned to see Thomas Garrett leaning against the hitching post, his smile unpleasant. He'd left Richardson's ranch shortly after the confrontation with James, but apparently he hadn't left the territory. "Mr. Garrett," Catherine kept her voice neutral, her hand moving instinctively to the knife James had taught her to carry at her belt. "If you'll excuse me, I need to get home." "Home? You mean that shack you share with the breed?" Garrett pushed off the post, moving closer. His breath reeked of whiskey. "You could have had a real husband, Catherine. Someone who knew how to treat a white woman properly." "Step back," Catherine said firmly. "Now, or what? You'll tell your savage husband?" Garrett laughed. "I'm not scared of Hawthorne. He's just a—" He didn't get to finish the slur. Catherine had pulled the knife and had it at his throat before he could blink, her hands steady despite the fury pumping through her veins. "Listen very carefully," she said, her voice low and deadly calm. "James Hawthorne is worth 10 of you. He's a better man, a better trainer, and a better human being than you could ever hope to be. And if I ever hear you speak about him that way again, I won't need his protection. I'll handle you myself. Do you understand?" Garrett's eyes were wide, his face pale. He nodded slowly, sweat beading on his forehead. "Good." Catherine stepped back, sheathing the knife with practiced ease. "Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about being civilized." Garrett scrambled away, nearly tripping in his haste. Catherine stood there for a moment, her hands shaking, now that the confrontation was over, adrenaline making her heart race. That was impressive. She spun to see Mrs. Richardson emerging from the general store, a basket on her arm and an approving smile on her face. "Mrs. Richardson, I didn't mean—" "Nonsense. Garrett's been trouble since the day he arrived here. Someone needed to put him in his place, and I'm glad it was you." The older woman came closer, her expression turning serious. "But you should know, he's been causing problems, spreading rumors about your husband, trying to turn people against him. Some of the smaller ranchers are listening." Catherine's stomach sank. "What kind of rumors?" "The usual ugliness. That James can't be trusted because of his mother's blood. That he's dangerous. That Richardson's a fool for giving him so much authority." Mrs. Richardson touched Catherine's arm. "My husband and I don't believe a word of it, and most sensible people don't either. But there are always small minds willing to listen to poison. What should we do?" "Keep doing what you're doing. James's work speaks for itself. He's the best trainer this territory has seen in decades. Quality always wins out over gossip eventually." She paused. "But be careful. Men like Garrett don't take humiliation well. Watch your back, and make sure James watches his." Catherine rode home with Mrs. Richardson's warning echoing in her mind. She found James in the barn, working with a skittish 2-year-old mare. The moment he saw her face, he set down his lead rope and came to her. "What happened?" Catherine told him everything. The confrontation with Garrett, the knife, Mrs. Richardson's warning about the rumors. As she spoke, she watched James's expression shift from concern to cold fury. "He threatened you," James said flatly. "He came near you, said those things." "I handled it," Catherine interrupted. "James, I pulled a knife on him. I threatened him right back. I wasn't a helpless victim." "I know you're not helpless." James's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "But hearing that he was spreading poison about me is one thing. Knowing he approached you, that he could have hurt you. Catherine, that makes me want to ride into town right now and finish what you started." "That's exactly what he wants," Catherine said urgently. "Don't you see? If you confront him, you prove all his ugly rumors right. You give him ammunition to paint you as the dangerous savage he's been calling you." James's jaw clenched. "So I do nothing? Let him spread lies and threaten my wife?" No, we do what Mrs. Smith likes. Richardson suggested. We keep working, keep building our reputation, and let our success speak louder than his poison. Catherine caught his hands. James, you've built something real here. You have Richardson's respect, your own land, a business that's thriving. Don't let a small, bitter man take that away because he can't stand to see you succeed. For a long moment, James stood there, wrestling with his anger. Catherine could see the war in his eyes, the part of him that wanted violence and vengeance, battling with the part that recognized wisdom in her words. Finally, he pulled her against his chest, his arms tight around her. You're right, he said roughly. I know you're right. It makes me crazy thinking about him near you. I know. Catherine pressed her face to his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage and horse. But I'm fine. I'm safe. And I'm not going anywhere. They stood that way for a long time, holding each other in the quiet barn while the horses shuffled in their stalls and afternoon sunlight slanted through the gaps in the wood. Catherine felt James's heart gradually slow, the tension in his muscles ease. Thank you, he said finally, for stopping me from doing something stupid. That's what partners do, Catherine murmured. We save each other from our worst impulses. James pulled back to look at her, something like wonder in his eyes. How did I get so lucky? Well, I did pull a knife on a man in broad daylight to defend your honor, Catherine said with a small smile. So I'd say we're both a little crazy. He laughed, a real laugh that chased away the last of the anger from his face. A little crazy. I can live with that. But as the days passed, it became clear that Garrett's poison was spreading further than they'd hoped. Two of the smaller ranchers who'd been considering contracts with James backed out without explanation. At church on Sunday, several families who'd always been friendly kept their distance, their eyes sliding away when Catherine tried to make conversation. The breaking point came in mid-June, when James discovered someone had cut the fence on their eastern pasture, letting 3 of Richardson's valuable horses loose onto the open range. It took them 2 days to track down and recover all 3 animals, and one had a badly cut leg that would take weeks to heal properly. This was deliberate, James said, as they finished repairing the fence, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Someone waited until we were both asleep, cut the fence in 3 places, and drove the horses out. Garrett? Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. Probably, or someone he convinced to do his dirty work. James hammered in the last fence post with unnecessary force. Richardson's going to lose money on that injured horse. This doesn't just affect us anymore. It affects everyone who depends on our work. That evening, Richardson himself rode out to assess the damage. The old rancher's face was grim as he examined the cut fence and the injured mare's leg. This is sabotage, he said bluntly. No question about it. I'm going to file a report with the sheriff, and I'm putting word out in town. Anyone caught tampering with my property or my employees will face legal consequences. Will it help? Catherine asked. Richardson sighed. Maybe, maybe not. Sheriff Barnes is a good man, but proving who did this is going to be near impossible. And unfortunately, there are people in this territory who think Garrett's ugliness is justified. He looked at James with surprising gentleness. I'm sorry you're facing this, son. You don't deserve it. I'm used to it, James said quietly. Been dealing with this kind of hate my whole life. Just hoped I'd finally found a place where I could leave it behind. You have found that place, Richardson insisted. The people who matter, the people worth knowing, They see your quality. The rest are just noise. He clapped James on the shoulder. Don't let the bastards win by giving up. You're the best horseman I've ever worked with, and I'll be damned if I let small-minded bigots drive you away. After Richardson left, Catherine found James standing by the barn, staring out at the rangeland he'd worked so hard to claim. I'm thinking about ending the contract, he said without preamble. This is only going to get worse, and I won't put you or Richardson in danger, because people hate what I am. No, Catherine said firmly. Absolutely not. James turned to look at her, surprise crossing his features. Catherine, no, she repeated, moving to stand in front of him. You don't get to give up because people are cruel. You don't get to let them win by walking away from everything you've built. She poked him in the chest, her eyes blazing. You told me once that the difference between surviving and living was knowing you had the power to choose your own path. Well, I'm choosing right now. I choose to stand and fight. I choose to build our business and our reputation until everyone in this territory knows that James Hawthorne is a man of quality. And I choose you, every single day, regardless of what anyone else thinks or says. James caught her hand, holding it against his chest. You could get hurt. If Garrett escalates, if whoever's doing this decides to target you directly, then I'll handle it, just like I handled Garrett in town. Catherine's voice softened. James, I've already lost one life to other people's cruelty. I won't lose another. This is our home, our business, our future, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take it from us without a fight. For a long moment, James just looked at her, something profound shifting in his expression. Then he kissed her, hard and desperate, and full of all the fear and love and determination coursing through them both. All right, he said, when they finally broke apart. We stay, we fight, but we do it smart. We don't give them any ammunition to use against us. Agreed. Catherine laced her fingers through his. Together. Together, James echoed. They stood there as the sun set over the Montana rangeland. Two people who'd both been broken by the world's cruelty, choosing to rebuild something stronger in its place. Summer brought both triumph and tragedy in equal measure. The horses James trained sold for record prices at the territorial fair, bringing Richardson substantial profit and cementing James's reputation as the finest trainer in Montana. Even the ranchers who'd been swayed by Garrett's poison had to acknowledge the quality of his work. But success brought its own dangers. In late July, James was working with a particularly difficult stallion, a massive bay with a nasty temperament and a history of throwing riders. The animal had been sold to Richardson as untrainable, but James had taken him on as a personal challenge. Catherine was in the cabin, working on the books, when she heard the commotion. Men shouting, horses screaming, a sickening crack of wood breaking. She ran outside to see the corral fence shattered, the bay stallion rearing and kicking, and James lying motionless in the dust. James! She vaulted the broken fence without thinking, sliding to her knees beside him. Blood matted his hair where his head had struck the fence post, and his left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. James, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. Catherine, the horse. Forget the horse. She was already yelling for the ranch hands who'd come running at the noise. Someone get the doctor. Now! The next hours were a blur of terror. The doctor came, set James's broken arm with efficient brutality that made Catherine feel sick, and stitched the gash on his head with 16 careful sutures. "He's got a concussion," the doctor said grimly. "Probably a moderate one, given how long he was unconscious. The arm should heal clean if he keeps it immobilized, but the head injury," he shook his head. "Next 48 hours are critical. He needs to be watched constantly. Any sign of confusion, vomiting, or seizures, you send for me immediately." Catherine didn't leave James's side for 3 days. She sat by their bed, monitoring his breathing, waking him every few hours as the doctor had instructed, forcing water and broth down his throat when he could manage to swallow. His fever spiked on the second night, and she spent hours bathing him with cool water, praying desperately to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely, gripping his good hand. "James Hawthorne, we have a life to build. We have a future. You don't get to abandon me now." On the third day, his fever broke. Catherine woke from an exhausted doze to find his gray eyes clear and focused on her face. "Hey," he rasped, "you look terrible." Catherine laughed through her tears. "You're one to talk. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days? James tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a groan. "My head feels like someone's using it for an anvil. You cracked it on a fence post when that bay threw you." Catherine helped him drink water, supporting his head carefully. "The doctor said you're lucky to be alive. Another inch to the left and—" Her voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you." James's good hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful with that horse." "The horse is fine, by the way," Catherine said. "One of the ranch hands managed to calm him down. Richardson wants to sell him. Says he's too dangerous." "No." James's voice was firm despite his weakness. "I can finish training him. Just need a few weeks to heal." "James." "Catherine, that horse isn't mean. He's scared. Someone hurt him badly before Richardson bought him. He just needs patience and someone who won't give up on him." James met her eyes. "Kind of like I needed you." Catherine felt fresh tears slip down her cheeks. "You're comparing yourself to a traumatized horse?" "If the horseshoe fits," he smiled weakly. "Come here. Lie down with me. I need to know you're real and not some fever dream." Catherine stretched out carefully beside him, mindful of his injuries. James pulled her close with his good arm, his face buried in her hair. "I heard you," he murmured, "when you were talking to me during the fever, telling me not to leave you, that we had a future to build. That's what brought me back, knowing you were waiting." "Always," Catherine whispered. "I'll always be waiting, always be here. You're stuck with me, James Hawthorne." "Best thing that ever happened to me." He breathed, and then he was asleep again. But this time it was natural healing sleep, rather than unconsciousness. Catherine lay awake, listening to him breathe, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. She'd come so close to losing him, and the terror of it still coursed through her veins. But he was alive, he was healing, and they had more time. She would make every moment count. James's recovery was slow and frustrating for a man accustomed to constant activity. The broken arm forced him to rely on Catherine and the ranch hands for everything, and the lingering effects of the concussion meant he tired easily and couldn't work with horses for nearly 2 months. "I'm useless," he grumbled one August afternoon, watching Catherine work with the bay stallion from his seat on the porch. His arm was still in a sling, though the doctor had said he could remove it in another week. "You're healing," Catherine corrected, not taking her eyes off the horse. She moved around the corral with confidence now, her body language calm and assertive. The bay watched her warily, but didn't threaten. "And you're not useless. You're directing me on what to do with this beast. And your advice is the only reason I haven't been thrown yet." "You're a natural," James said, and there was pride in his voice. "Better than I was at your stage of learning." "Liar!" But Catherine smiled. She approached the bay slowly, her hand outstretched, letting him catch her scent. The stallion tossed his head, but allowed her to touch his nose. "There's a good boy. See? Nobody's going to hurt you here." Over the following weeks, Catherine finished what James had started with the bay. She named him Thunder, for the sound his hooves made when he ran, and gradually earned his trust through patience and consistency. By early September, she was riding him around the corral, and by October, he was gentle enough that even James could handle him with one arm. "You did it," James said, watching Thunder nuzzle Catherine's shoulder, looking for treats. "Took an untrainable horse and turned him into a partner." "We did it," Catherine corrected. "Your methods, your teaching. I just applied what you'd shown me." "No." James pulled her close with his now healed arm, the sling finally discarded. "You trusted yourself. You saw what that horse needed and gave it to him. That's not something I can teach. That's who you are." Catherine looked up at him. This man who'd saved her life by seeing her worth when no one else would, and felt something shift in her chest. They'd been through so much together. His nightmares, her confrontation with Garrett, the sabotage, his near-death experience. Every challenge had somehow made them stronger, more intertwined. "I love you," she said simply. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." James kissed her softly. "I love you too, and I'm grateful for every single day we get to build this life together." That night, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Catherine thought about how far they'd both come. She was no longer the frightened woman who'd arrived with nothing but a ring and desperate hope. She was a wife, a horse trainer, a businesswoman, a fighter. She'd found her strength in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely partner. And she wouldn't trade it for all the titles and estates in England. Winter came again, their second as a married couple. The rhythms of their life had settled into comfortable patterns. Work and rest, challenge and triumph, moments of tender intimacy, balanced with the practical demands of running a successful horse training operation. But beneath the surface, Catherine was aware of something changing in her body. She'd missed her monthly courses twice now, and certain smells that had never bothered her before, like the morning coffee James loved, suddenly made her stomach turn. She waited until she was sure before telling him, wanting to avoid the disappointment if she was wrong. But by late January, there was no denying it. She was pregnant, approximately 3 months along, and the reality of it filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She chose to tell him on a quiet evening after dinner, the fire crackling cheerfully while James worked on repairing a bridle and Catherine pretended to read. Finally, she set down her book and took a deep breath. "James, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, concern crossing his features. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think anything's wrong." Catherine twisted her hands in her lap. "We're going to have a baby." The bridle fell from James's hands. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling her up into his arms. "A baby," he breathed, his hands moving to her still flat stomach with wondering reverence. "Catherine, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I'm about 3 months along, I think." 3 months. James's voice cracked. "You've known for a while?" "I wanted to be certain before I told you. I didn't want to get your hopes up if I was wrong." He pulled back to look at her. and she was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," he said roughly. "A wife, a home, a child. I spent so many years alone, convinced I was meant to stay that way. And now," his hand spread across her abdomen, "now we're gonna have a family." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, reading the complexity in his expression. "Happy? Catherine, I'm terrified and thrilled and—" He laughed shakily. "I have no idea how to be a father. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I pass on all my damage to our child?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Catherine said firmly. "Just like we figured out everything else. You're going to be an amazing father, James. You're patient and kind and strong, and our child is going to be so lucky to have you. We'll teach them everything," James said, his voice full of wonder. "How to ride and read and stand up for themselves. We'll teach them that worth comes from who you are, not what you're called." He paused. "And we'll make sure they never feel like they don't belong anywhere. They'll always know they're wanted, they're loved, they're home." Catherine pulled him down for a kiss, tasting salt from both their tears. "They're going to have the best father," she whispered, "and we're going to muddle through parenthood together, just like we muddle through everything else." "Together," James echoed and kissed her again. Epilogue. 2 years later, Catherine Hawthorne straightened from the fence where she'd been watching a yearling colt test his legs, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The Montana summer sun beat down fierce and bright, but she'd long since adapted to its intensity. Her skin was bronzed, her hands calloused, her body strong from daily labor. "Looking good," James said, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. "The colt, I mean. Though you're not bad either." Catherine laughed and elbowed him gently. "Charmer, what happened to the strong, silent type I married? You corrupted me with all that talking." But his eyes were warm as he kissed her temple. "Richardson's buyer is coming next week to look at the 3-year-olds. If we sell all 6, that's enough to start building the new barn. And finish the house addition." Catherine turned in his arms, her hands resting on his chest. "We're going to need more space soon." It took James a moment to understand. When he did, his eyes went very wide. "Catherine, are you—" "About 3 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." She smiled up at him, reading the joy and terror warring on his face. "We're going to have a baby, James." He lifted her off her feet, spinning her once before setting her down with exaggerated care, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, suddenly uncertain. They'd never really discussed children, too focused on building their business, their life together. "Happy?" James laughed, and she heard the brightness in it. All the walls he'd spent years building completely demolished. "Catherine, I'm terrified and thrilled and—" He kissed her deeply. "I love you, and I'm going to love our child. We'll teach them to ride and read and stand up for themselves. We'll teach them that worth comes from who you are, not what you're called." Catherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "That sounds perfect." "It will be." James pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "We'll muddle through together, just like we always do. Together." That word had become their anchor, their promise, their truth. They'd both been alone for so long, both been broken by different cruelties, both been forced to rebuild from ruins. But together, they'd created something neither could have built alone. A home, a business, a love deep enough to weather any storm. as the sun began to set over the rangeland they'd claimed as their own, Catherine Hawthorne, former Lady Catherine Ashford, daughter of Hampshire, now wife and horse trainer and expectant mother, looked at the life she'd chosen and felt nothing but gratitude. They'd taken her title, tried to make her property, attempted to erase her worth. But James had seen what they couldn't, that her value had never been in a name or a contract. It had been in her courage, her intelligence, her capacity to love and be loved in return. He'd given her back her worth, and in doing so, he'd given her everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Catherine and James's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.